Welcome, dear students. Today our topic of deliberation is theory of class conflict. In political science, the term class conflict, or you can also say class struggle, class warfare, capital labor conflict, identifies the political tension and economic antagonism that exist among the social classes in a society because of socio-economic competition for resources among the social classes between the rich and the poor. In the political and economic philosophies of Karl Marx and Mikhail Bakunin, class struggle is a central tenet and a practical means for effecting radical socio-political change for the social majority, the working class. The form of class conflict include direct violence such as wars for access to and control of natural resources and labor, assassinations and revolution, indirect violence such as death from poverty and starvation, illness and unsafe working conditions, economic coercion such as the threat of unemployment and capital flight, the withdrawal of investment capital, and ideologically by way of political literature. The political forms of class warfare include lobbying, that could be legal and illegal, and bribery of legislators. The social class conflict can be direct, as in a dispute between labor and management, such as an employer's industrial lockout of their employees in effort to weaken the bargaining power of the corresponding trade union, or indirect, such as workers' slowdown of production in protest against unfair labor practices, low wages and poor working conditions. In political science, socialists and Marxists use the term class conflict to define a social class by its relationship to the means of production, such as factories, agricultural land, and industrial machinery. The social control of labor and of the production of goods and services is a political contest between the social classes. The anarchist Mikhail Bakunin said that the class struggles of the working class and the peasantry and the working poor were centered to realizing a social revolution to depose and replace the ruling class and the creation of libertarian socialism. Marx inherited the idea of class and class struggle from utopian socialism and the theories of Henry de Saint-Simon. These had been given substance by the writings of French historians such as Adolphe Thiers and Francois Guizot on the French Revolution of 1789. But unlike the French historians, Marx made class struggle the central fact of social evolution. The history of all hitherto existing human society is the history of class struggle. In Marx's view, the dialectical nature of history is expressed in class struggle. With the development of capitalism, the class struggle takes an acute form. Two basic classes around which other less important classes are grouped opposite each other in the capitalist system: the owner of the means of production or bourgeoisies and the worker or proletariat. The bourgeoisies produced its own grave diggers. The fall of the bourgeoisies and the victory of the proletariat are equally inevitable. That's mentioned in the Communist Manifesto. Because the bourgeoisie's relations of production are the last contradictory form of the process of social production. Contradictory not in the sense of an individual contradiction, but of a contradiction that is born of the conditions of social existence of individuals. However, the forces of production which develop in the midst of bourgeoisie society create at the same time the material conditions for resolving these contradictions. With this social development, the prehistory of human society ends. When people have become aware of their loss, of their alienation as a universal non-human situation, it will be possible for them to proceed to a radical transformation of their situation by a revolution. This revolution will be the prelude to the establishment of communism and the reign of liberty reconquered. In the place of the old bourgeoisie society, with its classes and its class antagonism, there will be an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. But for Marx, there are two waves of revolution. One is that of a final conflagration, a violent suppression of the old conditions of production, which occur when the opposition between the bourgeoisie and proletariat has been carried to its extreme point. This conception is set forth in a manner inspired by the Hegelian dialectic of the master and the slave in the Holy Family. The other conception is that of a permanent revolution involving a provisional coalition between the proletariat and the petty bourgeoisie, rebelling against a capitalist that is only superficially united. Once a majority has been won to the coalition, an unofficial proletarian authority constitutes itself alongside the revolutionary bourgeoisie's authority. Its mission is the political and revolutionary education of the proletariat, gradually assuring the transfer of legal power from the revolutionary bourgeoisie to the revolutionary proletariat. If one reads the Communist Manifesto carefully, one discovers inconsistencies that indicate that Marx had not reconciled the concepts of catastrophic and of permanent revolution. Moreover, Marx never analyzed classes as specific groups of people opposing other group of people. Depending on the writings and the periods, the number of classes varies, and unfortunately, the pen fell from Marx's hand at the moment when in Das Kapital, in volume 3, he was about to take up the question. Reading Das Kapital, one is furthermore left with an ambiguous impression with regard to the destruction of capitalism. Will it be the result of the general crisis that Marx expects, or of the action of the conscious proletariat, or of both at once? Dear students, let's talk about the contribution of Friedrich Engels. Engels became a communist in 1842 and discovered the proletariat of England when he took over the management of the Manchester factory belonging to his father's cotton firm. In 1844, the year he began his close association and friendship with Marx, Engels was finishing his outline of a critique of political economy, a critique of Smith, Ricardo, Mill and J.B. Say. This remarkable study contained in seminal form the critique that Marx was to make of bourgeoisie's political economy in Das Kapital. During the first year of his stay in Manchester, Engels observed carefully the life of the workers of that great industrial center and described it in The Condition of the Working Class in England, which was published in Leipzig. This work was an analysis of the evolution of industrial capitalism and its social consequences. He collaborated with Marx in the writings of Holy Family, the German ideology and the Communist Manifesto. The correspondence between them is of fundamental importance for the students of Das Kapital, for it shows how Engels contributed by furnishing Marx with a great amount of technical and economic data and by criticizing the successive drafts. This collaboration lasted until Marx's death and was carried on posthumously with the publication of the manuscripts left by Marx, which Engels edited, forming volumes 2 and 3 of Das Kapital. He also wrote various articles on Marx's work. In response to criticism of Marx's ideas by a socialist named Eugen Dühring, Engels published several articles that were collected under the title Herr Eugen Dühring's Revolution in Science, better known as Anti-Dühring, and an unfinished work, Dialectics of Nature, which he had begun around 1875 or 76. The importance of these writings to the subsequent development of Marxism can be seen from Lenin's observation that Engels developed in a clear and often polemical style the most general scientific questions and the different phenomena of the past and the present according to the materialistic understanding of history and the economic theory of Karl Marx. But Engels was driven to simplify problems with a view to being pedagogical. He tended to schematize and systematize things as if fundamental questions were settled. The connections that he thus established between some of Marx's governing ideas and some of the scientific ideas of his age gave rise to the notion that there is a complete Marxist philosophy. The idea was to play a significant role in the transition of Marxism from a critique of daily life to an integrated doctrine in which philosophy, history, and the sciences are fused. Anti-Turing is of fundamental importance, for it constitutes the link between Marx and certain forms of modern Marxism. It contains three parts: philosophy, political economy, and socialism. In the first, Engels' attempt to establish that the natural sciences and even mathematics are dialectical, in the sense that observable reality is dialectical. The dialectical method of analysis and thought is imposed by the material forces with which they deal. It's thus rightly applied to the study of history and human society. As Engels has said, and I quote, "Motion, in effect, is the mode of existence of matter," unquote. In using materialistic dialectic to make a critique of Turing's thesis, according to which political forces prevail over all the rest in the molding of history, Engels provides a good illustration of the materialistic idea of history, which puts the stress on the prime role of economic factors as driving forces in history. The other chapters of the section Political Economy form a very readable introduction to the principal economic ideas of Marx: value, simple and complex, labor, capital, and surplus value. The section Socialism starts by formulating anew the critique of the capitalist system as it was made in Das Kapital. At the end of the chapters devoted to production, distribution, the state, the family, and education, Engels outlines what the socialist society will be like: a society in which the notions of value has no longer anything to do with the distribution of the goods produced, because all labor, and I quote, becomes at once and directly social labor, unquote, and the amount of social labor that every product contains no longer needs to be ascertained by a detour. A production plan will coordinate the economy. The division of labor and the separation of town and country will disappear with the suppression of the capitalist character of modern industry. Thanks to the plan, industry will be located throughout the country in the collective interest, and thus the opposition between town and the country will disappear to the profit of both industry and agriculture. Finally, after the liberation of humanity from the condition of servitude imposed by the capitalist mode of production, the state will also be abolished and religion will disappear by natural death. One of the most remarkable features of anti-Turing is the insistence with which Engels refuses to base socialism on absolute values. He admits only relative values linked to historical, economic, and social conditions. Socialism cannot possibly be based on ethical principles. Each epoch can successfully carry out only that of which it is capable. Marx had written this in his preface of 1859. Marx's theory of history proposes that class conflict is decisive in the history of economic systems organized by hierarchies of social class such as capitalism and feudalism. Marxists refer to its overt manifestation as class war, a struggle whose resolution in the favor of working class is viewed by them as inevitable under the plutocratic capitalism. Dear students, let's talk about the Marxist perspective. Now, Karl Marx, who was born in 1818 and he died in 1883, was a German-born philosopher who lived the majority of his adult life in London, England. In the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx argued that a class is formed when its members achieve class consciousness and solidarity. This largely happens when the members of class become aware of their exploitation and the conflict with another class. A class will then realize their shared interests and a common identity. According to Marx, a class will then take action against those that are exploiting the lower classes. What Marx points out is that members of each of the two main classes have interests in common. These class or collective interests are in conflict with those of the other class as a whole. This in turn leads to conflict between individual members of different classes. Marxist analysis of society identifies two main social groups: labor, the proletariat or workers. Include anyone who earns their livelihood by selling their labor power and being paid a wage or salary for their labor time. They have little choice but to work for capital, since they typically have no independent way to survive. Now the second one, capital, the bourgeoisies or capitalist, which include anyone who gets their income not from labor as much as from the surplus value they appropriate from the workers who create wealth. The income of the capitalists, therefore, is based on their exploitation of the workers, or you can say proletariats. Not all class struggle is violent or necessarily radical, as with strikes and lockouts. Class antagonism may instead be expressed as low worker morale, minor sabotage, and pilferage, and individual workers' abuse of petty authority and hoarding of information. It may also be expressed on a larger scale by support for socialist or populist parties. On the employer's side, the use of union-busting legal firms and the lobbying for anti-union laws are forms of class struggle. Not all class struggle is a threat to capitalism or even to the authority of an individual capitalist. A narrow struggle for higher wages by a small sector of the working class, what is often called economism, hardly threatens the status quo. In fact, by applying the craft union tactics of excluding other workers from skilled traders, an economistic struggle may even weaken the working class as a whole by dividing it. Class struggle becomes more important in the historical process as it becomes more general, as industries are organized rather than crafts, as workers' class consciousness rises, and as they self-organize away from political parties. Marx referred to this as the progress of the proletariat from being a class in itself, a position in the social structure, to being one for itself, an active and conscious force that could change the world. Marx largely focused on the capital industrialist society as the source of social stratification, which ultimately results in class conflict. He states that capitalism creates a division between classes which can largely be seen in manufacturing factories. The proletariat is separated from the bourgeoisies because production becomes a social enterprise. Contributing to their separations is the technology that is in factories. Technology deskills and alienates workers as they are no longer viewed as having a specialized skill. Marx believed that this class conflict would result in the overthrow of the bourgeoisies and that the private property would be communally owned. The mode of production would remain, but communal ownership would eliminate class conflict. After a revolution, the two classes would struggle, but eventually the struggle would recede and the classes dissolve. As class boundaries broke down, the state apparatus would wither away. According to Marx, the main task of any state apparatus is to uphold the power of the ruling class. But without any classes, there would be no need for a state. That would lead to the classless, stateless, communist society. Now, dear students, let's talk about the non-Marxist perspective. One of the first writers to comment on class struggle in the modern sense of the term was the French revolutionary Francois Boissel. Other class struggle commentators include Henry de Saint-Simon, Augustin Thierry, Francois Guizot, Francois Auguste Mignet, and Adolphe Thiers. The physiocrats David Ricardo and after Marx, Henry George noted the inelastic supply of land and argued that this created certain privileges, economic rent for landowners. According to the historian Arnold J. Toynbee, stratification along lines of class appears only within civilizations and furthermore only appears during the process of a civilization's decline while not characterizing the growth phase of a civilization. Perry Joseph Proudhon, in What is Property, which he has written in 1840, states that, and I quote, certain classes do not relish investigation into the pretended titles to property and its fabulous and perhaps scandalous history, unquote. While Proudhon saw the solution as the lower classes forming an alternative solidarity economy centered on cooperatives and self-managed workplaces, which would slowly undermine and replace capitalist class society, the anarchist Mikhail Bakunin, while influenced by Proudhon, insisted that a massive class struggle by the working class, peasantry, and poor was essential to the creation of libertarian socialism. This would require a final showdown in the form of a social revolution. One of the earliest analyses of the development of a class as the development of conflicts between emergent classes is available in Peter Kropotkin's Mutual Aid. In this work, Kropotkin analyzes the disposal of goods after death in pre-class or hunter-gatherer societies and how inheritance produces early class division and conflict. Fascists have often opposed horizontal class struggle in favor of vertical national struggle and instead have attempted to appeal to the working class while promising to preserve the existing social classes and have proposed an alternative concept known as class collaboration. Some historical tendencies of orthodox Marxism reject racism, sexism, etc. as struggles that essentially distract from class struggle, the real conflict. These divisions within the class prevent the purported antagonists from acting in their common class interest. However, many Marxist internationalists and anti-colonial revolutionaries believe that sex, race and class are bound up together. Within Marxist scholarship, there is an ongoing debate about these topics. According to Michel Foucault, in the 19th century, the essentialist notion of the race was incorporated by racist biologists and eugenists who gave it the modern sense of biological race, which was then integrated into state racism. On the other hand, Foucault claims that when Marxists developed their concept of class struggle, they were partly inspired by the older non-biological notions of the race and the race struggle. Quoting a non-existent letter from Marx to Friedrich Engels during a lecture, Foucault erroneously claimed Marx wrote, and I quote, "You know very well where we found our idea of class struggle. We found it in the work of the French historians who talked about the race struggle." Unquote. For Foucault, the theme of social war provides for overriding principle that connects class and race struggle. Moses Hess, an important theoretician and labor zonist of the early socialist movement, in his epilogue to Rome and Jerusalem, argued that the race struggle is primary, the class struggle is secondary. With the cessation of race antagonism, the class struggle will also come to a standstill. The equalization of all classes of society will necessarily follow the emancipation of all the races, for it will ultimately become a scientific question of social economics. In modern times, emerging schools of thought in the US and other countries hold the opposite to be true. They argue that the race struggle is less important because the primary struggle is that of class, since labor of all races face the same problem and injustice. Class struggle or class warfare or class conflict is tension or antagonism in society. It is said to exist because different groups of people have different interests. Looking at society this way is a feature of Marxism and socialism. Social sciences group people with similar social features into classes. Most of these features are economic. According to Marxism, there are two main classes of people. The bourgeoisie controls the capital and the means of production, and the proletariat provide the labor. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels say that for most of history there has been a struggle between these two classes. This struggle is known as class struggle. After the Communist Manifesto and thus Capital, this concept became well known. Class struggle happens when the bourgeoisie, the rich, pay the proletariat, the workers, to make things for them to sell. The workers have no say in their pay or what things they make, since they cannot live without a job or money. Karl Marx saw that the workers had to work without any say in the business. He believed that since the workers make the things, they should say where they go and for how much, instead of the rich owners. They had to work hard to earn a living while making the rich richer just doing simple office work. Since they had to earn money to buy food and jobs were the only things that give money, they had no choice but to work for the rich who made the business. The rich become richer while the worker hauled and lifted and did all of that hard manual stuff no one really likes to do. Karl Marx thought that their labor limited their freedom. He wanted the workers to unite and take over the business so that they could all be prosperous. He thought that the common man deserved to run the business and that the rich were not better than the commoner. Class struggle appeared in some forms. First, there is an economic form. The proletariat struggle with the bourgeoisies through their laborers' organization in this form. Second, there is a political form. In this form, the proletariat has their party and through democracy, they try to change the system. And the last, there is an ideological struggle. In this form, the proletariat try to adapt the old governing system to new social situations. There are other forms of struggle too. These forms are not exclusive but exist at the same time. Class struggle appeared all throughout history. At first, people lived in small communist societies. Then they took property from the earth for themselves and started to use slaves. Then they had feudalism, which meant one person owned an entire area of land and used soldiers and workers to help them make money, and only gave their workers land, but they had some freedom that slaves didn't. Finally, in Karl Marx's time, people in some countries were becoming workers and bosses during the Industrial Revolution. The bosses owned the machines that the workers used to make things, but they didn't help using the machines. Instead, they made money by buying the time and energy of the workers to make things. Marx believed that the workers were not making as much money as they deserved because the boss would make money from the work. They did without helping. Marx believed that countries would overthrow capitalism and that workplaces would move towards socialism. This roughly means that the workers would control the workplaces. When this would have happened everywhere, Marx thought the world will have achieved communism. The Soviet Union overthrew feudalism. They never reached the point of capitalism, so their society was very corrupt. Many blame them for the bad name of communism. There are some workplaces and societies which are being run democratically by workers, such as the kibbutzim in Israel. Social democrats and liberal conservatives do not see society as described by Marx. They see society as changing gradually through the system of democratic voting. The European Union is composed almost entirely of countries governed by this kind of system. But it's not universal throughout the world. Very few countries have undergone the kind of revolution forecast by Marx. It's much more common for military leaders to seize power and enforce a dictatorship which is neither democratic nor revolutionary. Karl Marx has said, and I quote, "The unity of the bourgeoisies can be shaken only by the unity of the proletariat," unquote. Present-day society is extremely complex. It is a motley patchwork of classes and groups: the big, middle and petty bourgeoisies, the big, middle and petty feudal landlords, journeymen, unskilled laborers and skilled factory workers, the higher, middle and lower clergy, the higher, middle and minor bureaucracy, a heterogeneous intelligentsia and other groups of a similar kind. Such is the motley picture our society presents. So dear students, it was all about today's lecture regarding theory of class struggle or class conflict. Hope you have enjoyed the lecture. Thank you.